Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of HOLOPHASE. Episode 13, Part 8, Cyclic Compact Value Space, the Loop of Reality. There is one primitive, phi, the holophase, a continuous cyclic order that makes reality readable. When phi becomes readable as change, its first differential phase appears, and with it, three inseparable readouts arrive together. The temporal dimension omega, omega, the spatial dimension kappa, kappa, and the kinematic dimension nu, nu, woven from the first two. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts these three shadows together. What we call worlds, objects, forces, histories, and minds are stable licensed patterns inside this derivative language. The formal mathematical work behind these ideas can be found on Zenodo by searching holophase. We did not begin from space or time. We did not begin from matter or energy. We began from what makes anything readable at all, and we learned to stay honest. We learned to license. We learned to demand coherence. We learned to refuse narrative drift. We learned that claims must carry prediction and falsification. In episode 12, installed the firewall, the discipline that prevents us from turning poetry into pretend physics. Now episode 13 slows down even more, because episode 13 has two movements. First, undifferentiated phi, the permission layer. Phi before anything becomes publicly readable as change. Second, differentiated phi, the public layer. Phi once change becomes licensed, shareable, reconstructible. Phi once omega, kappa, and nu show up as readouts, and topology and tallies can become lawful, and persistence can become certified. The first must come before the second, because if we do not earn the permission layer first, we will smuggle the later layer back in as if it were the source. We will treat shadows as ground. We will treat readouts as primitives. We will rebuild the old habits with new symbols. So we keep the vow. And before we enter this part's deep content, hold the whole episode 13 picture in your mind. Anchor A is the permission layer. What phi is, what phi is not, and why nothing can be built without earning comparability first. Anchor B is the public layer. How change becomes readable under licensing, how omega, kappa, and nu appear as readouts, how topology and tallies become lawful, how persistence and memory become possible, and how the firewall governs every claim. We are still inside Anchor A. We already earned 4 permissions. In part 3, we earned the fact that phi is primitive comparability, not a thing, but the condition that makes distinction possible at all. In part 4, we earned the fact that phi is pre-ontological. It comes before the word exists, can even be used without cheating. In part 5, we earned the fact that phi is not difference itself. It is the capacity for difference, not the outcome. In part 6, we earned gauge relational essence. Absolute values are silent, only relations can speak. In part 7, we earned the public carrier. If relations are to be shareable, they must be encoded in gauge invariant carriers, patterns that survive translation from one private reference to another without collapsing into ambiguity. So now we arrive at part 8, and part 8 is the moment where the silent ground reveals its shape. Not the shape of space, not the shape of time, not the shape of matter. The shape of value itself. The shape of what phi can be before it is anything for anyone. And before we go further, the firewall contract, the sentence that keeps this clean. If you hear me smuggling space, time, energy, matter, or dynamics as primitives here, treat it as an error. Good. Now listen. Part 8 makes one claim. One claim that sounds simple. One claim that, if true, is like a key that unlocks why reality produces exact integers in places where we expected endless smoothness. Here's the core claim in plain language. Phi does not live on a line. Phi lives on a loop. Let me say it again even more simply. If you keep going in phi, you don't go forever. You come back. That is the whole claim. But the consequences of that claim are enormous. And to feel it properly, I want you to stand somewhere real. I want you on the Afghan-Pakistan border, high in the Hindu Kush, where stone and wind teach you geometry without using the word. Imagine a narrow mountain pass, not a wide valley, not a gentle road. A pass that is a thread through rock. On one ridge, an Afghan sentry post. On the facing ridge, a Pakistani sentry post. They cannot casually cross. They cannot casually meet. Between them is not just distance, but history. And yet their work is the same kind of work every observer in the universe must do. They must coordinate without cheating. In part 7, we use their mirrors and their flashes to show how public truth requires carriers that survive translation. Now we will use the same mountains to show something else. Because along that pass, there is a patrol route. A route carved into the mountain by feet, not machines. It circles a peak like a band around the wrist. It starts at a particular marker stone near the Afghan post. It loops around the shoulder of rock. It passes a notch where the wind whistles through. It passes a slab of slate that rings under boot. It passes a cairn of stacked stones. And then, after the full circuit, it returns to the marker stone. This is how the patrol stays honest. Because in that landscape, you can lose yourself in fog. You can mistake one ridge for another. You can think you have advanced when you have only drifted sideways. So the patrol route is designed to do one thing. It closes. It brings you back. Not approximately, exactly. And here is the rule the mountains enforce. If the route is truly a loop, then a complete circuit is a whole thing. One circuit, two circuits, three circuits. There is no such thing as 2.5 complete circuits. There is 2 circuits, and then you are on a third that is not yet complete. Completion is discrete. Not because the mountain is made of pixels, not because the soldier's boot is quantized, not because someone imposed the rule by hand, because closure is merciless. Because a loop either closes or it doesn't. And now feel the twist. Imagine a young sentry who says, I walked the loop and I returned. Almost. Almost to the marker stone. Almost to the starting point. He points. I am very near it. And the older sentry says calmly, then you did not complete the loop. Because the whole meaning of complete is you are back where you began. If you are not back, you are not complete. This is the first taste of what Part 8 is claiming about phi. A loop is a space in which return is built in. A loop is a space in which the end meets the beginning. A loop is a space in which going all the way around is a definable act. And because it is definable, it is countable. And because it is countable, it yields integers. Now let's lift this out of the mountains and into the permission layer. Up to now, we have treated phi as the primitive condition of comparability. We have said phi is what allows something to be distinguishable from something else. We have said You do not get to talk about outcomes until you earn the possibility of outcomes. We have said, you do not get to talk about absolutes, only relations speak. We have said, you do not get to share relations without public carriers that survive translation. Now part 8 says, even before differentiation, phi is not just some value. It lives in a particular kind of value space, and that value space is cyclic. Cyclic does not mean goes up and down. Cyclic does not mean repeats in time. We're not talking about time yet. Cyclic means something quieter. It means the set of possible values is shaped like a circle, not like an infinite line. A circle is compact. Compact means bounded. But it is not bounded like a wall that stops you. It is bounded like a loop. You can keep moving forever, and you never fall off, but you never escape the circuit. So the claim is, the primitive phi takes values on a circle. If you keep increasing phi, you wrap. You do not go to a new forever. You return. Now, why does this matter? Because if the permission layer is linear, then nothing forces exact closure. If phi lived on a line, then you could always drift. You could always be a little more phi, a little less phi, a little further, endlessly. And in such a world, exact integers do not appear by necessity. They can appear, but they appear only if you impose boundaries, or impose closure, or impose periodicity. They do not appear because the foundation demands them. But if phi lives on a circle, then closure is not imposed. It is native. And when closure is native, integers do not arrive as decoration. They arrive as accounting. How many times did you go around? That question is not optional. It is forced by the existence of loops. And now listen carefully. This is the moment where holophase stops being only a philosophy of readability and becomes a generator of necessity. Because the circle does something a line cannot do. It makes whole meaningful. It makes complete meaningful. It makes winding meaningful. And those meanings are not psychological. They are structural. They are the kinds of meanings that survive translation between observers. They are the kinds of meanings that can be carried publicly. They are gauge invariant. And that is the bridge between part 7 and part 8. Part 7 said, public truth must survive translation, so public carriers must be gauge invariant. Part 8 says, on a circle, the deepest gauge invariant truths are counts of closure. Not where you are on the circle, because where depends on where you choose 0. But how many times you went around, because that does not depend on where you label 0. That is why cyclicity is not a stylistic choice. It is the simplest topology that naturally generates public integers. Now let me say the core claim again, with the smallest possible words. Phi wraps. And because phi wraps, complete loops can be counted. And because complete loops can be counted, certain outcomes will be forced to be whole numbers. That is the heart. Now let's address the confusion that usually appears here. Most people hear phi lives on a circle and immediately imagine a picture. They imagine a circle drawn in space, like a hoop. And then they begin to ask spatial questions. How big is it? Where is it located? What is it made of? Those questions are illegal at this stage, because size is spatial, location is spatial, material is a later readout. This circle is not a hoop in space. This circle is the shape of value. It is the topology of possibility. It is the permission layer's geometry. And we are not doing this to be clever. We are doing this because cyclic topology is exactly what you need if you want a continuous foundation that can produce discrete, certified integers without cheating. Now we can make the prediction, and we must make it in holophase terms. The prediction is not quantum mechanics is true, as if quantum mechanics were a primitive. The prediction is about what will happen whenever we later construct certified loops in the derivative language of phi inside licensed windows. If phi's value space is a circle, then whenever we have a closed loop in the certified gauge invariant structures built from phi, the total return will be an integer multiple of a full turn. Said simply, complete loops will yield exact hole counts, not approximate, exact. Now you might ask, what does a full turn mean in phi? It means returning to the same physical value, not just the same label. And because part 6 taught us that absolute values are silent, we measure return relationally. Return is, after you traverse a closed loop, the only physically meaningful difference between end and start is whether it is the same point on the circle or how many full wraps you accumulated on the way. That count is an integer. It cannot be 3.7 wraps, because 0.7 of a wrap is not a closed loop. It is an unfinished patrol. It is being on the ridge, but not at the marker stone. And now bring your mind back to the border mountains. The sentry does not need an absolute coordinate system to know a loop closed. He needs a marker stone. He needs a return. He needs a closure condition. And if he returns, he can say, publicly and verifiably, one circuit completed. This is what cyclic phi makes possible for the universe. It makes closure conditions natural. It makes integer outcomes the language of completion. Now let's make the prediction more operational, without importing forbidden primitives. If the circle is fundamental, then the simplest topological invariants of the phi language will be winding numbers. Winding numbers are just how many wraps. And because they are topological, they are robust. They do not change when you wiggle the path a little. Just like the patrol loop still counts as one circuit, even if you step around the puddle. So in a phi-closed universe, when we later encounter stable, licensed structures that correspond to going around something, we should expect their certified identity to be indexed by integers. Whole numbers that cannot be gradually deformed away. Whole numbers that are not chosen by convention. Whole numbers that are the universe's way of keeping accounts. This is why Part 8 has the power to illuminate the later appearance of discreteness. Because discreteness, in holophase, is not a fundamental grain. It is the arithmetic of closure. It is what you get when a continuous field lives on a circle and you demand public, gauge-invariant certification. Now, if you are listening with the firewall alive, you will notice I am being careful. I am not saying electrons are primitive. I am not saying charge is primitive. I am not saying quantum numbers are primitive. I am saying later, when those words appear as names for stable patterns inside the derivative language, their discreteness will not be an extra miracle. It will be an accounting consequence of cyclic value space. Now let's state the falsification condition. Because we do not get to keep claims just because they are beautiful. We keep claims only if they can be heard. Here is the falsification in plain language. If phi does not live on a circle, then we should be able to build a complete, firewalled account of why reality produces exact integer closure results without ever using cyclicity anywhere in the foundation. Or even more direct, if, under the holophase discipline, we can certify a truly closed loop in the relevant gauge invariant structures, and the loop's certified return is not an integer count of full reps, then this claim fails. If a sentry completes the patrol loop and returns to the marker stone, but the mountain reports 1.3 circuits, then the mountain is not a loop. If we can close the loop and still not get wholeness, then cyclicity is not the correct foundation. So the falsification is simple to say. If a certified closed loop yields a non-integer closure value, this claim fails. Now you might object, But what does certified closed loop mean without space and time? Good. That means you are hearing the discipline. At this stage, loop is not a path in space. It is a closed traversal in the relevant relational structure once that structure is licensed. And yes, the full operational definition belongs to the later parts where licensing, windows, and encoders are fully deployed. But the falsification shape is already clear. A loop is a loop only if it closes, and closure yields wholeness only if the value space is cyclic. If someone shows wholeness without cyclicity, then the circle is unnecessary. Or if someone shows a loop without wholeness under full certification, then the circle is wrong. Either way, the claim can be broken. Now we must make the scope and limits explicit, because this is where people start to smuggle. Here is what we are not saying. We are not saying spacetime is cyclic. We are not saying the universe repeats in time. We are not saying history loops like a movie playing again. We are not saying everything is periodic in the naive sense. We are not saying the universe is finite. We are not even talking about the size of the circle, because size is a spatial measure and space is not primitive here. We are making a narrower, deeper claim. The target space of phi is cyclic. Phi is a phase-like value, and its value lives on a circle. That is all. Now let's tie this back to the earlier permissions, because part 8 is not floating. It is anchored. In part 5, we said phi is the capacity for difference, not difference itself. A line gives you endless difference, but no natural completion. A circle gives you difference with return. It gives you the possibility of a difference that can be completed. It gives you the possibility of an account that can close. So cyclic phi is the capacity layer's way of preventing infinite drift. In part 6, we said absolutes are silent. Only relations speak. On a circle, the most natural relations are angular separations, and the most natural invariants are how many times you wrap. On a line, relations exist too, but there is no native, gauge-invariant notion of wrap count. The circle gives the relational world a new kind of public fact, winding. In part 7, we said public truth must be carried by gauge-invariant patterns. On a circle, winding number is the most public pattern there is, because it survives translation. It survives changing where you call zero. It survives calibration. It survives small noise. Just like the patrol loop remains one patrol, even if the sentry takes slightly different steps. So part 8 is not just phi is a circle. It is phi is a circle because the universe needs a topology that can produce public, gauge-invariant integers without imposing discreteness by hand. Now I want you to feel why the circle is so strict. Imagine you are back at that mountain pass. Fog rolls in. Visibility drops. The sentry begins the patrol. He counts his markers by touch. The notch in rock, the ringing slate, the cairn. These are his relational anchors. They are his carriers. Now suppose someone secretly moves the marker stone a few meters. Not far, just a little. Then the patrol becomes ambiguous. The loop is still a loop in the mountain, but closure is now corrupted in the sentry's reference. And this is the exact point. Public truth requires stable carriers, and closure requires stable identity. So when the universe uses cyclicity to produce integers, it is also declaring something about what must be stable for those integers to be meaningful. You cannot count reps if the definition of return is allowed to drift arbitrarily. So cyclic value space does not stand alone. It leans on the firewall. It leans on licensing. It leans on coherence. It leans on the requirement that the loop is truly closed in the certified sense, not merely imagined closed. This is why holophase is prediction first, because cyclicity is powerful, but only if you can operationally say what counts as a loop. And that is exactly what the later parts of episode 13 will earn: the ability to talk about closure with discipline, not with hand-waving. Now, a brief energy reminder, because listeners always try to turn this into energy talk. When later we speak of energy, we do not mean a substance. We mean a tally, a count of certified change in licensed structures. And part 8 is telling you something about tallies in advance. Some tallies will be continuous, because not every tally is a loop tally. But the tallies that are loop tallies will be whole, because loops demand closure, and closure demands integers. So the circle is not quantum magic. The circle is a counting architecture. Now let me bring the claim back one final time, in the simplest words possible. Phi wraps. It does not run to infinity. And because it wraps, reality can do something that a linear foundation struggles to do cleanly. It can produce exact discrete identities from continuous change without cheating. Now I will give you the listener carry. One sentence. Hold it like a compass in fog. Reality wraps. And when a loop closes, the universe counts in whole numbers. Keep that. Now the transition, gentle and clean. If phi lives on a circle, then the next question is unavoidable. A circle is simple, but the world is richly structured. So how does one cyclic value space remain consistent when different regions, different windows, different certified observations must be stitched together without contradiction? How do local descriptions agree on overlaps? How does a loop stay a loop when you only see a piece at a time? That door opens into the next part. For now, stay on the ridge. Feel the patrol route beneath your feet. Feel the marker stone at the start. Feel the return. And remember, in a loop, completion is not a feeling. It is a fact. And facts, in holophase, are always what survive the firewall. Here is the essence of what we wove in this part, said plainly, in one breath. Phi's value does not live on an infinite line. It lives on a closed loop. So going all the way around is a real, gauge-invariant act. And whenever certified loops appear in the license structures built from Phi, their closure will be counted in exact integers, like a patrol that returns to the same marker stone on the Afghan-Pakistan ridge, where completion is whole or it is not completion at all. Always peace be upon you.